I had nothing else to do really. um, early days when I was a young boy, I spent a lot of my early days from when I was maybe 5 till when I was 13. I was at boarding school in England, which was the most horrendous time ever because being so young, and my brother actually was 4 years older than me, so he was in like a different different category, and I was just horrified because I thought this is going to be so cool. You know, you got your school uniform and your soccer outfit and this and that and the other, and it's going to be so cool. And I got there and I wasn't even allowed to talk to my brother or hang out with my brother. So basically, especially when I was very, very young, I would cry for like 2 weeks, just not understanding why I couldn't see or talk to my brother.
That's the way
because,
it is.
well, British boarding schools, if you guys have ever seen or read the book Tom Brown's School Days, you need to read that or see the old movie. That's what boarding school was all about. There was a lot of bullying going on.
It's hierarchical between the years, and you can't talk to anybody in a year above you and all that stuff.
True, yes,
Yeah.
and it was horrendous. The only upside was that my auntie Molly would come down from Sunderland, which is in the northeast of England, once a month on a Sunday afternoon, and she could take me away from the school, and we would go and have a picnic in the park. And she used to tell me the story, you know, when I was older, that I used every 10 minutes I would say, "How long have we got, Auntie? How long have we got?" And she said, "Well, you just asked me that, Nigel." But it was just horrendous. But the good thing was that I got to see her, and we used to have 8 weeks vacation in the summertime where I would go and visit my parents. The reason that I was at boarding school is because my father was the chief marine pilot for the Ghanaian government. Ghana used to be the Gold Coast. It's the country next to Nigeria, and it was the Gold Coast, and he was a marine pilot, which is the tankers and big ships that used to come into the harbour. He used to have to get on board the ships and pilot them in so they didn't crash into old wrecks or the rocks or anything like that. So he was a pretty big deal. And myself and my brother would go there in the summertime for 8 weeks and spend it with our folks in Ghana, which was, I so want to go back there.
When was the last time you went? Were you still a kid?
I was still a kid, yeah. Because they changed, you know, from the Gold Coast, they changed the government. It used to be a British colony, but then I'd love for us to go and play in Africa, but most of Africa is at war with each other. And I just don't get that stuff, you know, that you live next door to somebody and you're at war with them. And most of the wars are religious. Not that, you know, I'm this big religious guy, but it just doesn't make sense to me. And later on we can get into my thoughts about the way things were and the way things are now with my attitude to what my job is now. So we'll get into that later.
Yeah, we certainly will. But so with this experience of English boarding school, which is very repressive inherently, and it would have been, you know, even more so then, is that what, I guess, you know, you say you play from the heart now, so I guess is that you know, maybe you were a bit emotionally wounded or whatever at that time, and is that what drew you to music, do you think?
I think we didn't have a music program at the school, but there was a record player that we were allowed to use once a week, and I would listen to Cliff Richard records all the time, and that's when I realised I want to be doing that, performing on stage, singing songs, and being on television to the American people. And that kind of gave me the vibe. And then at the weekends in Africa, the local village guys came to our house, and they would play homemade drums, and they'd be singing and these beautiful harmonies, and I didn't understand a word they were singing about, but it just felt and sounded so amazing, and that kind of got me into, wow, this is pretty cool. And then we'd listen to music on the radio, and my brother and I would pretend we had guitars, but they were like frying pans or something, So that's basically where it came from, and I think the drumming and the rhythms, that came from that African influence. I think that's
Africa.
Yeah, because
and the harmonies as well.
And the harmonies too, and the tones that I use on the drums, the way I have Chris, my tech, the way I have him tune them, which I've always had them tuned very, very low, so they have that drone, and that again comes from hearing the African drums, because they have this special tone. It's like, when you hear Indian music, like Ravi Shankar and stuff like that, the tablas and stuff, they have such tonal quality, and that's what I like to project in my drums, sound-wise, and the way that I play them.
Yeah, well, I mean, the tone of those fills, even today, if you go and see you playing in concert with Elton John, when those fills come in on songs like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road or Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, or particularly Someone Saved My Life Tonight, I mean, they sound like no other drummer and no other drum sound, and that's what I would recommend to anyone who hasn't seen Nigel play with Elton. When you go to one of those gigs, you won't even need to pay attention, because it creates that space and tension in the songs. But so going back to that time, you've mentioned Cliff Richard, and we've interviewed him already in this series, and as we discussed then, Cliff Richard was sort of like based on Elvis.
Yeah.
And he was the original British rock and roll star, and this kind of proves the longevity of your career, because I guess the first major thing that you did was joining Plastic Penny, wasn't
Yes.
it? What went on between being at boarding school and moving to London and being part of that scene with so many people like Caleb Quay and Roger Pope and all of those guys? What happened? How did you get into it?
When I left boarding school, I moved to Sunderland, which is in the northeast of England, and that's where my basically our family home was. We moved from Liverpool up to Sunderland, and it was kind of a seafaring town, and that's where a lot of our family were based. So I was playing in local bands, blues bands, whatever I could. I started off as a singer. I was a guitar player. I was a guitar player, but in those days you only needed 3 chords.
Yeah.
And you got it right.
Yes.
So and I was lead singer. And then there was one gig that we did, and our drummer couldn't show up, so I thought, well, I can keep the beat, so I'll just go back on the drums. And the places that we used to play were pubs or working men's clubs, which are clubs that, you know, factory workers and stuff like that, they would have, it's like their community would have they'd have a town hall or whatever, and we would go and play those gigs. In the pubs, it was a whole different deal, because if you didn't play the Rolling Stones songs or a Beatles song or whatever, they'd start slinging stuff at you. And I realized then that, oh, it might be a good plan if I was behind the drums and, you know, angle the cymbals up so that if beer bottles come flying, they'd just go ding, ding, you know, instead of in the face. And we were at one show, and there was a guy came over to myself and Mick Grabham, who was the lead guitar player, who went on to be with Procol Harum and a few other bands.
And who you wrote with?
And who I wrote with, yes. And there was a talent scout at that show, and he came up to Mick and I, and he said, I've got a band in London who have a hit record, or going up the chart record, called Everything I Am, and which was the B-side of a box top record over here. The A-side of their record was The Letter.
Oh, right.
The B-side of that was Everything I Am. So Dick James Music had the deal with the Plastic Penny, but it wasn't really a band yet. It was session guys who went in, they cut the song, put it out, and it started to become very, very popular. So they realized, oh, we got to put a band together to go and promote it. So Mick and I went down to London, passed the audition, and we were handled then by Dick James. Dick James Organisation. It was kind of a publishing company who had the Beatles, a lot of the Liverpool guys, and Elton and Bernie worked as staff writers there.
Yeah.
So that's how I became friendly with them. Just being...
They're all just part of that
yeah,
scene.
it's all part of that.
And they were just like anybody else, you know, really, weren't they? They were
struggling.
People like Caleb Quay.
Caleb was there, Roger Pope was there, Clive Franks, who was one of the most amazing sound guys that we've ever had.
Is he now retired?
He's retired many, many years ago.
But did he produce stuff as well?
He produced the Kiki D record.
And is he in some of your album credits as well?
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
He engineered the whole thing.
So a lot of these faces from many records, and certainly from Elton John records, all part of this scene here in London, in the late 60s. And it was you and Dee in Plastic Penny.
Dee was in a band called The Mirage, who were also handled by Dick James. And he and I became friends, again, just being around the studio. The bass player from the Plastic Penny was Tony Murray, who later went on to, he did a couple of demos with Elton and Bernie, and then he joined the Trogs. He was the Trogs bass player. But we were at the studio, and then the Elton thing came up, where let's go back. The Plastic Penny, we did tours to promote Everything I Am, and it got pretty high on the British charts. So we did TV performances and gigs around England, and then that kind of fizzled out. And Dee had joined the Spencer Davis group just after Steve Winwood had left. So he was with the new Spencer Davis group, and they were coming here to the States to do a tour, which was actually his final tour with that particular band. So Dee asked me if I would be interested in coming over here to the States. And I said, let's do it. So we came over, we did one tour over here, and it was amazing. Especially coming to Los Angeles, because in those days it was, it had this certain vibe.
Or the Laurel Canyon.
It was Laurel Canyon, and it was Sunset Strip, and it was just free.
It's a magical, iconic time. Yeah.
It was so magical, and so when that finished, I went back to England and did some demos with for Elton Bernie songs.
And on that tour, so where else did you go other than LA? Was it big?
We went round Detroit, and little gigs in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Chicago area, and then we did a couple of things here. I think at the Whiskey, on the Strip.
Yeah.
And we went back to England, and Spence said, "This is it," So Dee and I were kind of out of work. So.
But it's incredible to think in hindsight that you guys, you and Dee, one of the great rhythm sections, but you guys had already been on a major tour. You'd already been to the US before coming here for the Big Troubadour, breaking Elton John concert type of thing. So it's pretty interesting for people, when you go back into rock and roll history, to realise that, and all of these different things go into creating, one of the biggest rock and roll catalogues, and one of the best rock and roll bands for sure.
Absolutely.
And so from there, as you say, you and Dee are now, you finished the Spencer tour, and I think at this point it would actually be worth mentioning. So you don't actually need to read music. You play everything from the heart, sing everything from the heart, and the head, of course. And what I'm interested to know is, how did this come to you so instinctively? What gave you the confidence to do it? Did you ever practice at home, singing? Do you just do it? Is that basically?
I just do it. I never learnt to read music, and I still don't read music. It's just something that it's the God-given thing that I'm just so blessed to be able to do what I do, and to do well at it, and to make people happy.
Another thing that's very distinctive about your musical style is your very high voice, which you can hear on your solo records. And obviously, in the big backgrounds on the Elton John records, like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road would be a fine example of that. So did you ever have to do any kind of musical training to sing that high?
No,
or any warm-ups or any maintenance, or do you just rock up and do it?
Yeah. I never practice or warm up before a show. It's just this, just the way I imagine it to be. This is how I should sing. This is the note that, when we were doing, we were up at Caribou Ranch in Colorado to do the Caribou series of records that we did up there, and we were so high up altitude-wise at Caribou, that we could sing an octave higher. So my high vocals and most of the high harmonies that you hear would be me. And then when we'd come kind of down the mountain and do shows, we'd wonder why, well, I can't hit that note. And it's because of the thin air up there, you know. But we managed to do it, and I still, I can't tell you what note it is or what key it is. Again, you know, I don't read music. In fact, a funny story, a little thing. My wife, Shanda, her dad was a very, very famous record producer. Larry Butler, his name was. And he produced Sammy Davis Jr., Julie Andrews, Kenny Rogers, all the huge records.
That's amazing.
And I used to do, when I moved to Nashville for a little while, I used to do sessions for him. And he would hand all the music, he'd come round in the studio and hand all the musicians their chord sheets or whatever. And he said, Nigel, and crumpled this one up and threw it away. And he says, you won't be needing this, right? And I said, thank you, Larry. I have no clue, but it's
Has that ever posed any problems for you whatsoever?
No. No.
But I'd say that yours is an extremely rare case. It must be.
I really haven't.
In terms of like, world-class drummers playing at the top level for, God knows how long, 50 years or something. It's unbelievable.
I think
to have it all instinctively.
It's partly because I actually play to the low end of the piano, and usually a drummer will play to what the bass player and the drummer are playing kind of off each other. But I play from the low end of the piano and the lyrics. I'm what I would class as a descriptive drummer.
Yeah.
There's a part in We All Fall in Love Sometimes, where there's a line that goes about the rain trickling down the sleepy subway train, and I do a little cymbal thing
to mirror
to mirror the rain falling, and just little things. There's a couple of things. There's a fill that I do in Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and it comes in the middle of the verse. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Ba-doom, doom, ba-boom. Well, that's a mistake. That was a mistake.
That you just kept in.
That we just kept in. Gus said.
And you still play it live,
man.
don't you?
Yes, we do it live.
Because it's that iconic, that type of stuff.
Gus Dudgeon said, don't worry, Nige, we'll leave it in. The beginning of Benny and the Jets, when it's ding, that was a mistake. Kept it in.
It's these type of instinctive things, I guess, you would lose if you're too mechanical. And I suppose people at this level can work with anyone. Mm-hmm. But here we are in 2019, something that started in 1969, and you're still playing.
Yeah.
So,
and we used to do vocals and turn. In those days, you could turn the tape round so that it would play backwards, and we'd sing forwards. And then we did a song called Six City, and there was some backgrounds that we did, but then we turned the tape back to front, played it backwards, and sang, then turned it the right way. And if you listen to Six City, you'll hear the backgrounds. Six City backwards is Ears Kiss, Ears Kiss.
Is that something that happens on...
You'll hear it on the record.
Is that on... Your Sister Can't Twist as well? Is there something like that going on? There's some sort of nonsensical...
So. Yeah, we used to just play around with different sounds. And, there's... Speaking of my drum sound, we never, ever... It took us at least 2 days in the studio with Gus and the engineer to get my drums to sound correct.
Wow.
The way that Gus and myself wanted them to sound.
And were you very, it sounds like you're very, very hands-on with that.
Yeah.
And if it's not if it wasn't sounding the way you like it, or if it,
we'd just have to work some more. There was times actually at Caribou when it was like dun 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 on one drum for hours, and then Ray would come in and he says, "No, I'll take over from." But see, when somebody else plays the drum, they will hit it at a totally different weight or whatever. So it's basically only me that can get that sound. So it's and I use close mics on the drums. But the key to my sound, especially the big ballads, is that I love huge rooms. So that we have the close miking, and then we have mics way up high in the ceiling. The higher the better, in each corner of the room, so that it gets that natural ambient sound plus a little delay. And we never messed with the drum sound, other than one time, which is on the record Better Off Dead, where we used the
so just close mic.
That was, we actually put in those days it was called an Eventide harmonizer, and it made the drums double. It kind of double triggered the drums so that it would be crack, croak, croak, croak. So if you listen to Better Off Dead, that was the only time we messed around with technology.
Otherwise, it's the natural drum sound that you worked to get.
Yes.
With Gus Dudgeon, who's very, undervalued in
he
in
was
one of the great record producers of all time.
Genius.
He's the George Martin.
Absolutely.
Of those records, which are, the Elton John albums, Elton John band albums, I would like to say, from the let's say 1972 to 1975, are like the Beatles of the 1970s, and it's just incredible work. But around this time, it was actually fairly early on into your career with Elton that you made what I would say is, holds up, because I was listening to it this morning, as a fantastic album from the early 70s, which was your Drum Orchestra and Chorus album, Volume 1.
Yes.
And so when you were writing these songs with Caleb and Mick, I want to know, was this the first time that you tried writing solo or collaboratively for a Nigel Olsson project? Or had songwriting come to you earlier? What was it that motivated you? Because obviously you had a gig with Elton John, who was just kind of rising, but not, he wasn't like a big star necessarily. And you'd obviously been here with the Spencer Davis Group. What made you want to make a solo record at this time?
I loved being in the studio so much, and Dick James, at his offices, he had this tiny little studio about the size of this room, and that's where I tell people, and they say, "Get out, you're lying." That's where John and Paul would come in and do demos and stuff like that, and we'd be in the office, and there's John and Paul just walking in, and "Hello, mate. So yeah, you're right, good." And it's wow. So we'd listen to, we'd hear them doing their stuff, and we could go after hours into Dick James and just set our gear up and just jam out, just play whatever you want to play. And Mick and Caleb and Roger Pope was around, Dee was around, and we'd just get together, and maybe I would come up with a riff, or Mick or Caleb or whatever, and we used to just jam, and it would become a song, and I'd write the lyrics or whatever. And
I noticed that you wrote most of the lyrics.
Yeah, it was just a magical thing that I wanted to do, and a couple of them worked. I mean, I had maybe 3 or 4 hit records.
Well,
in the early times.
I would say throughout your career they work, because all the albums still, they hold up as classic 70s albums. I would say they're extremely underrated. And obviously the Nigel album from 1979, that was you know, quite a big hit album, and Dancing Shoes was a massive hit and still is.
Yeah.
You know, it still gets a lot of radio play, which, you know, you probably don't keep your eye on too much because you're so busy with Elton. But you know, these records hold up very well. So the first one has a kind of like tumbleweed connection-y type of sound, which is hardly surprising considering it was made by the guys who made that album.
True.
And Some Sweet Day was the first single from that. And, you know, I would say it has that kind of, those lush backing vocals and that kind of like Americana sound. Was that something that, I guess it just rubbed off on you? Was that the kind of music?
It rubbed off on me after we came on the American scene.
And is the band an influence, that type of stuff?
Yes. Yes.
Like
The
Levon
way
Helm.
Levon Helm was a big inspiration of somebody that would hold back. And holding back means two things to me. One is holding back, not overplaying, and holding back playing. I play actually, and Levon did also, is I play a little behind the beat. I kind of try and hold, especially ballads, hold them back, because I feel if you hold them back, it's like you're breathing, and it gives air to the track and to the song, especially with the big ballads. You know, I'm a balladeer, I'm a romanticist, you know, I have so much love for people, and I need to project that in the way I write or I sing and when I play.
Yeah, and I mean, you could tell this from even your drum fills. Mm-hmm. There's an example that I actually wrote down this morning, which is, you know, I'll always love you, which I noticed Wayne, you know, he's got the credit there, mm-hmm. Your brother Wayne, for which I guess would be for a couple of words in the lyrics.
He did do a couple of words that we were looking for. There was just a line that I couldn't finish, and he just came up with this at the dinner table one time, and we said, boom. And you know what? He still says, when am I going to get royalties for that? Bless him.
Well, it's nice to see him on the credits, because he's on the credits.
Yes, he is. Yes,
and you know, I'll always love you. It's just the way that we've already gone into drum sound, but it's just the way those tom fills come in at the start, and it's the restraint at which they're placed. An example on an Elton John album is probably, and especially when it's played live, is Someone Saved My Life Tonight. After that big piano intro, the way the drums come in, it's just, yeah, I mean, it highlights, as you say, you're a balladeer. So you made one record, and then that was 1971. So there would have been 4 years in between then, which you know, aside from making about 15 Elton John #1 albums and going on countless world tours, I guess did you not have any time to breathe or to think about a solo career?
No. We have an album ready to come out, and we'd be touring the album that was out. So we were always one album ahead when we toured. And now and again we'd stick one of the new things in just to see how it would work. But we were way ahead of everything all the time. And that was the magic. I mean, once Elton and Bernie started writing and they realized that people were noticing and enjoying what we all were doing, it was the magic was just more brilliant than ever, you know, and it still is, you know. I mean, the records, even when the band changed, Elton changed the band at one stage, and Dee and I weren't involved, and his explanation was that he wanted to kind of go in a different direction, sound-wise or song-wise. But basically, if you hear those records that I'm not on, the drums kind of sound like what I would have played anyhow, so whatever.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
Well, I mean, you know, I would say also, for whatever reason, maybe it's just that unique chemistry, which is almost like a band. But, you know, we're talking about Captain Fantastic, I guess would have been when it was left off. And then you guys came back properly for Too Low for Zero, which has I'm Still Standing, I guess that's why they call it the Blues, Kiss the Bride, etc. And then I think you guys continued in the band for another 4 or 5 years, sad songs. I mean, if you look down like what you guys play now, which is the hits in an Elton John concert, it's also amazing that you and Davey pretty much played on all the songs that you're playing on the studio versions, and you're still playing today, which makes you, Davey, and Elton almost like, it's like going to see Fleetwood Mac or going to see the Eagles, in the sense that you guys have been playing together for that long. It's such a rare and amazing thing.
Well, you know, what is amazing to me is that there's certain things that I would do or Davey does that within the first bar of what we are playing, people react because they know what's coming. Like the beginning of Bitches Back, it's like, "Goodbye," and then, oh, that's it. If they hear the beginning of Benny and the Jets, as soon as they hear jing, they know exactly what that song is. There's fills that I do, which I can see some people in the audience doing the, you know, the air drums or whatever.
They know what's going to happen.
And that is so amazing to me that people know my drum fills. It's so cool.
Well,
I'm blessed to do this, whatever.
Yeah, well, there will be people everywhere who know, you know, every fill, every guitar lick, because I mean it's had that longevity. But so after the Drum Orchestra and Chorus album, you worked with one producer who is, you know, one of the most successful producers of all time, David Foster. And you worked with him at a stage before he'd done, you know, Hard to Say I'm Sorry, or with Chicago, or After the Love Is Gone with Earth, Wind and Fire. And the records that you did with him, the Nigel Olsson records, I think they just sound absolutely brilliant.
Well, I'd met him when I came to LA on my own. I did a lot of session work. Sometimes I would do 3 sessions a day for different artists. And David was part of that thing. There was a couple of the team would have been myself, Lee Sklar on drums, the bass, David Foster on keyboards, sometimes Steve Proper on guitar. I mean, you know, we do this and that. And I became very close with David because we were kind of on the musical, the same wavelength. And we would, then I had a studio in my house at that time, and he would come over and we'd just kind of fool around with chords, and I said, oh yeah, that's brilliant, let's do something like that. And I would, when he went home, I would sit down and listen and just write words. And, you know, it was just something that happened. I didn't plan on it. It just happened.
Yeah, because it's
like everything. I don't plan anything for myself anymore because
things just come along.
Things come along, and I'm now contracted for. So I'm always basically on standby for Elton team. So
yeah,
I don't have time really, other than me going and racing cars. Which I'm not meant to do, by the way. I don't really have much downtime, and when I do have downtime, I like to spend it with my wife and my little puppies and to just chill. You know, I don't go to clubs, I don't go to movies, I wait for them to come on the TV. I just like to be in my house.
Well, because I mean, at the moment you're playing whatever it is, 100 and.
Well, we just came back 2 weeks ago from a 73-day tour in Europe, And that was one of the most grueling tours I've ever done because it was back to back. So, you know, we have 3 stages now. We have a big stage, a medium stage, and a small stage. So it's become now this huge entity in the business that, and we're the biggest tour in the world right now, which is insane for me to think about. From way back when in boarding school,
Yeah.
and crying for 2 weeks, and now going out on tour and seeing all these people and knowing the songs. And the key to me is if I see a little kid, the little kids come with their grandparents, their parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and the kids are singing Crocodile Rock, which is my least favourite song, but there you go, to see these little kids. And we're still selling out places.
And after all that you've been through, you know, all the different solo albums with Elton, you've worked with Rod Stewart and Linda Ronstadt, you know, does it sometimes feel like, do you feel incredibly lucky to still be playing, or do you think that the Elton John band and players like you and Davey have a unique kind of stamina? Because there's not many bands. I don't think there's a single band in the history of rock and roll who've played as many shows as you guys have together. How many shows have you played together? Like 2,000 or 3,000?
It's probably more like 4,000 now that I've played with him. It's amazing to think that I am part of music history, because, you know, when we got together in the studio, you know, nobody told each other, well, you got to play this like that, you got to play that. It was all separate. We all had our own things that we did, and it became this huge thing. You know, it's not only Elton and Bernie. People forget about Bernie.
They do, and the
yes.
words are very important.
Yes. And
you play to the lyrics.
Yes, and the history of the Elton John thing, you know, the big time when it happened was right here in LA at the Troubadour. And people forget about that there was only 3 people. There was Elton, Dee, and myself.
And before then, there was nothing really, was there?
No.
It was the first ever show in America.
This was a make or break situation. Dick James sent us over here and he said, okay, we've got this deal happening with a record company over there. They're really interested in, your song was out right then, and they're interested in going over. So I'm going to put the money up to send you guys over there, and it's a make or break situation. If it doesn't work, I can get you a job at a shoe shop down in Oxford Street. And I never worked at the shoe store, so I guess we did good. And here we are now. And this thing, it might be very big-headed of me, but I feel that our contribution, Davey, Ray Cooper, and myself, and I said D, right?
Yeah.
Well, an important part of the music. And
I think you guys should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Exactly. The historians, I don't know what kind of historians they have over there, but, you know, we should be in there.
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to make it, you know, one of my missions to, and there are a lot of people out there who feel the same way, because you guys have been part of music history. You've appeared on, I mean, that Elton John band, you, Davey, Dee, and Ray were on Honky Chateau, Caribou, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Captain Fantastic, you know, on the whole thing. It wasn't like, oh, you guys played on track 1 and track 3 and track 5. It was, you played on the whole thing. You did the background vocals for everything. You know, I believe Davey's the low part, you're the high part, Dee's the middle part.
Yeah.
And that's on Rocket Man, that's on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, that's on Someone Saved My Life Tonight, that's on The Bitch Is Back, that's on Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting, Benny and the Jets. Every single one of these hits that you hear, and that's not to do down Bernie Taupin for being a fantastic lyricist, to do down Elton John for being the phenomenon that he is and a great songwriter. But the Elton John band are a huge part of rock and roll history. And it must be very strange in a sense, But I mean, I guess, you know, life just progresses and you don't know where it's going to take you. But, you know, you first met him when he was, you know, Reginald Dwight, late 60s. There was no difference when you met him between Caleb Quay, who you wrote songs with, or between Dee, who you'd already been, I mean, you guys had already been to America when you came here to do that Troubadour show. So I guess in that sense you have a unique, you know, relationship and friendship, and it's interesting to see that you remain part of the band, and you have done for 50 years.
Yeah. Plus, people also forget about Bernie.
Yeah, he was a big part of that.
When we first came over as the 3-piece, I actually classed it as a 4-piece because Bernie to me was part of the whole thing, so he was part of the band.
How long did he tour with you guys?
A few tours in the beginning, and then he just went away to write.
He wanted to do his own thing.
His own thing. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much that one could ask you about, but I feel like we need to, you know, get down to brass tacks here. So, one of the amazing stories that I want to ask you about, and those people who are into rock and roll history will be able to see this amazing photo of you on I can't remember what the name of the jet is, but it's a jet that you toured with, the Elton John band, and you're sort of arm in arm with John Lennon.
Oh, the Starship one, yes.
So tell me about that, because some people may not know that you were actually playing drums for John Lennon's last ever live performance. As someone who presumably would have been listening to the Beatles when you were at the latter stages of boarding school, you were certainly doing those Beatle covers when people were throwing things.
Yeah.
What did it feel like within like 10 years to be playing drums with John Lennon at Madison Square Garden?
And still is the most amazing show that, you know, when people ask me what was your favourite show you ever did, was Madison Square Garden with Lennon. He came up and did, I think we did 4 songs. And he was so nervous. Davey had to tune his guitar. He actually threw up before, he was so nervous before we went on. And he came to the Boston Garden to see, that was the gig before Madison Square Garden. He came up to rehearse with us and stuff like that. And he's looking at the gear, and he said to me, he said, Nige, he says, how many drums you got? How many microphones have you got on them drums? And I said, probably about 16, 17. He said, fuck me, we were lucky to get 3 for the vocals when we were on. And it was just, he was so blown away. He came to Caribou with us to cut Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and he ended up staying for a week. He would hang with us at on tours. And Ringo too. Ringo is one of my heroes because he also, you know, the sound of the drums on, they come together, you know, the dum dum dum, and he leaves out.
A tasteful
it's
drummer.
So tasteful. And,
and he plays to the songs.
He does absolutely play to the songs, and everybody puts him down. Ringo, no, he's not a good drummer. Well, I beg to differ, people.
Well, it's to do with your heart and your soul, and that's what I definitely feel that you've brought to musical history. So it's been an honour talking to you, Nigel.
God bless you. Thank you.